First of all, gods are generally going around slaying monsters, right? If there are stories with heroes and monsters, the heroes are slaying the monsters, generally, not employing them. Also, we like things to be neat, right? We like the good guys on one side of the room and the bad guys on the other side of the room, and we like to be able to tell them apart. And we might want to come to the Bible in particular. I say we. This is not necessarily the case for me, but I think for a lot of readers, we might want and expect to see God on the side of good and good on the side of God. So there are a lot of reasons why we might expect to see God slaying monsters and want to see God against the monsters. Except that what we actually see when we look closely and carefully through the texts is that time after time after time, God isn't slaying monsters in the Bible. God's deploying monsters and deploying them against human beings.
You describe God himself as the monster of monsters. Yes. You compare apologetics for God's behavior to Nixon, saying if the president does it, it's not illegal. For people who grew up being told God is perfectly just and loving, how do you reconcile that with a deity who sends lying spirits, plague demons, and destroying angels to do his dirty work?
Yeah. Well, I think it's delicate, right? You ask how a person can reconcile these images of God in the Bible with faith in a deity who, is maybe good. And I think the hard answer is that the idea that we hear sometimes, God is good all the time, God is good. I teach at a seminary, right? That idea and what it actually says in the Bible are not compatible.
Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Today, our guest is Dr. Esther J. Hamori, professor of Hebrew Bible at Union Theological Seminary in New York, where she teaches the wildly popular course Monster Heaven. She holds a PhD in Hebrew Bible and the Ancient Near East from New York University and an MDiv from Yale Divinity School. Dr. Hamori specializes in ancient Israelite concepts of divine human contact and is the author of Women's Divination in Biblical Literature, Prophecy, Necromancy, and Other Arts of Knowledge. Her latest book, God's Monsters, Vengeful Spirits, Deadly Angels, Hybrid Creatures, and Divine Hitmen of the Bible, has been endorsed by scholars like Bart Ehrman, Cornel West, and Mark S. Smith, received a starred review from Booklist, and even nominated for a Bram Stoker Award. Yes, a horror award. She's here to talk about the creatures the Bible doesn't want you to look too closely at, and the God who commands them. Dr. Hamori, welcome to MythVision.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again. Shameless plug for the book. Everybody go get a copy. God's Monsters. I've read this a while back when you first released this, not a long time ago, 2024, but and I was blown away at just how alive the Bible becomes reading this book. And I even made a little video promoting this book called, after the title, of course, and I hope people will go and check that out. But also, you're going to be doing a lecture on this very topic at NIHB, New Insights into the Hebrew Bible. Can you tease us with what that'll be about exactly, or what you plan on doing?
Sure. So Bart Ehrman has this wonderful program. This is the first time he's doing a Hebrew Bible conference, all online. I believe you're seeing how to subscribe. And he asked us to come up with anything in Genesis. And when I was writing God's Monsters, I did a lot of thinking about the sea monster in Genesis 1, but you can't put everything into a book if you want the book to be readable. So my sea monsters chapter in that book does not address Genesis 1. So when Bart invited me to do this, I immediately said, great, I finally have a place to talk about sea monsters in Genesis 1.
Wow. I'm looking forward to that lecture series. There's some great names in the lineup, and you are one that I have wanted to interview for quite some time. You've covered all sorts of interesting material that I love to learn. And I wanted to dive into some questions, if you don't mind, about the book.
Great.
Awesome. So my first question is this. You argue that most of the Bible's monsters aren't God's enemies. They're God's entourage. Can you walk us through that distinction? Because for most churchgoers, demons fight God and angels serve God, and you're saying it's far messier than that. So maybe what are monsters in the Bible might be important as we introduce it, but can you address this question for me, please?
Sure, thank you. So I think that there are a lot of good reasons why readers, especially readers from either a directly Christian context or a sort of in the water because America Christian context. I think there are a lot of reasons why such readers would expect that if there are monsters in the Bible, that God would be slaying them. There are good reasons for that. First of all, gods are generally going around slaying monsters, right? If there are stories with heroes and monsters, the heroes are slaying the monsters, generally, not employing them. Also, we like things to be neat, right? We like the good guys on one side of the room and the bad guys on the other side of the room, and we like to be able to tell them apart. And we might want to come to the Bible in particular. I say we. This is not necessarily the case for me, but I think for a lot of readers, we might want and expect to see God on the side of good and good on the side of God. So there are a lot of reasons why we might expect to see God slaying monsters and want to see God against the monsters. Except that what we actually see when we look closely and carefully through the texts is that time after time after time, God isn't slaying monsters in the Bible. God's deploying monsters and deploying them against human beings. It's actually quite awkward.
I think it would be very awkward coming from our perspective, right? Evangelicals are not taught to think that way. But it seems that's a common theme in the ancient world, and we anachronistically have no clue. So my second question is cherubim as sphinxes, seraphim as venomous winged serpents. You show that these creatures have been radically domesticated in popular Christianity. What do they actually look like in the ancient Near Eastern context? And why has the tradition worked so hard to soften them into chubby babies and glowing humanoids?
Right. Yeah, the ideas that people have today of what cherubim and seraphim are bear virtually no relation to how they are described in the Bible. So different texts about cherubim describe them in some different ways, but always with a core similarity, a theme. The same is true for the descriptions of seraphim. The seraphim are not the same in every text, but there's a theme that connects them. So cherubim, as you said, are like sphinxes. That is, cherubim in the Bible serve in a particular role. They're classic hybrid guardian figures. And in some texts, they are physically built in wood or stone. And in some texts, they are imagined in a mythological description of a time and place. And in some texts, they're envisioned, right, a prophetic vision. But in all cases, they guard the boundaries of sacred space. And their role in doing that is not always just to keep human beings out of sacred space. if they're not supposed to be there. It's also sometimes to keep God in. That's where it can get awkward. So the cherubim look different in each of those texts, but with that key theme. And that does come from earlier material in the ancient Near East or ancient Southwest Asia or the ancient Middle East, depending on how you want to define the area. If you look up Lamassu, Lamassu, and see stone figures at the Met, for example, or the British Museum, those are hybrid guardian figures in pairs guarding a divine throne or maybe a palace throne. It's the same idea. The Seraphim are descendants of another common idea from other parts of the region. If you can picture an Egyptian crown with an asp on top, like this, shouldn't try to act it out. The idea of that mask or that crown is that it's a cobra rearing. Did I say asp? I don't really know my poisonous snakes, but I'm going to go now with it's a cobra rearing, ready to strike. And in a lot of, I maybe won't go through each time and place right now. You can read more if you're curious. In a lot of the material and the literature, we can see that there is a descendant of this figure, which is a winged poisonous serpent. And they also have particular roles, a little too much to get into here, but they can serve as God's attack dogs, basically. You can see clay seals, seal impressions of multi-winged serpents from Judah. So, I mean, we know that these related areas all, related ideas all filtered in to the thought and therefore the literature of the region. So, yeah, you asked why the tradition has worked so hard to soften it all. I mean, I think as time went on, there was more there was a development in more dualistic theology, and there was a religious impulse to keep God's hands clean, and which, like in the Bible, they're really not always. And so, multiple factors come together, and you get a definite desire to distinguish between the good guys and the bad guys. But
I love it. I think that's brilliant. One interesting thing, I was reading Gilgamesh and I thought myself, the mountain, huh?
I said, as one does. Yeah.
Right. And the mountain of Mashu.
Yeah.
The scorpion men, I know that you were mentioning the cherubim. They're not necessarily the same creatures in every context. They could be a different kind of creature, but they're guardians to the sacred or to the territory or boundaries, like you said, between life and death. And I even go so far, and I might be reaching, as this is just throwing something at the wall.
Yeah.
I was reading in Surah 18 in the Quran about this sleepers of the cave story, which we have hagiography in Christian tradition about with 7 sleepers, but they have a dog at the cave's entrance where the men are sleeping, which I think symbolizes death. And there's this resurrection theme there. And I thought, that dog reminds me a little bit of Cerberus. And Cerberus would serve as a kind of guardian, right? So there seems to be in the air.
Interesting. Sorry.
Please.
Yeah. So I don't remember that surah. We're recording on February 17th, Ramadan Mubarak to anybody listening today. I don't know when you'll put this up or listening anytime soon. I don't remember that surah. Is it a regular old workaday dog, or is it like a special hybrid dog?
I tell you, it's got to be something ferocious. The tradition.
I'm going to go look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, the tradition actually tames it because I thought the same thing. Because when you go into the Surah al-Kaf, it's called, and you go down and you're looking it up, trying to see, what's this dog? What kind of dog is this? It describes the dog as ferocious and scary. So
Mm.
it says something about here. I even pull it up. It'd be fun to kind of just show, because I actually showed this to Islamic PhD experts on the Quran and said, "Look, I think there's something here," and they went, "I never saw that. I never thought about that." But it was your work that gives me the kind of the cue to kind of think that way. Sometimes we don't know what we're looking for. Here it is.
Nice.
So it says, "And you would have thought they were awake, though they were asleep." Of course, the sleepers. "We turned them over to the left and the right while their dog stretched his forelegs at the entrance, Guardian. Had you looked at them, you would have certainly fled away from them filled with horror." So you have this dog that's here, right? And it's like it reminds me of the ferocious, scary Cerberus dog that is there. And I've had Islamic scholars say, "Yeah, I think you're onto something there." So
interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I'd make the comment because I wonder how much Seraphim and Cherubim like take different forms in different cultures,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the phenomenon of a hybrid guardian creature, I mean, that's why I asked if it was just a regular dog that happened to be, big and aggressive and scary, or if it was a dog with, a scorpion tail, a lion's head. I mean, it's because the phenomenon of the hybrid guardian creature is really broad. I mean, certainly across the ancient Middle East, and again, ancient Southwest Asia, however you whether you think about that geographically or etc. So, for example, Cerberus, right? Hybrid. I don't remember what the other parts are right now, but he's a hybrid guardian creature. This is the context in which I talk about the scorpion people. They have only some scorpion parts and some parts of other creatures. And the function of a hybrid guardian creature, you can imagine, right? The only thing more terrifying than a creature that has all of the scariest features of that one kind of creature is a creature that has all of the scariest features of that kind of creature and all of the scariest features of some other kind of creature. The paws and claws of a lion and the back talons of an eagle and the mouth of a God knows what and the scorpion tail, and in some texts, the intellect of a human being. That's why sometimes you get a wild hybrid creature with a human face. Why have this particular animal, the human animal, be the face? Not because we have the biggest fangs, but because you add the human mind to all of those ferocious, dangerous other animal parts, and you get the most dangerous predator for any prey. I was thinking of the most dangerous prey, but we're the predator in this case. We being the monster. I'm really identifying here with the hybrid guardian creature.
Right. I guess if I were forced to have to go down a path, I might look to Persia, Zoroastrianism, because they have this afterlife concept where dogs guard the bridge. And I think that maybe that would be a better correlation than the hybrid theme that you're talking about. But it's still this like guardian between life and death, which I think that cave represents. So yeah, I mean, there's something going on. I know.
Yeah, I'll have to look up the cave. Yeah.
Yeah. You describe God himself as the monster of monsters.
Yes.
You compare apologetics for God's behavior to Nixon, saying if the president does it, it's not illegal. For people who grew up being told God is perfectly just and loving, how do you reconcile that with a deity who sends lying spirits, plague demons, and destroying angels to do his dirty work?
Yeah. Well, I think it's delicate, right? I know you have a large audience, and so I'm sure it includes people coming from a, a variety of perspectives. And I'm not here to try to talk anybody out of faith in God and whatever version of God they believe in, but I may be here a little bit to try to encourage people to question their view of the nature of the Bible. Because you ask how how a person can reconcile these images of God in the Bible with faith in a deity who, is maybe good. And I think the hard answer is that the idea that we hear sometimes, God is good all the time, God is good. I teach at a seminary, right? That idea and what it actually says in the Bible are not compatible. So a person can have faith in God and a person can read the Bible, but if a person's view of the Bible does not feel compatible with how to say, I mean, I think that if a person needs to set aside a lot of biblical texts to make the Bible match their view of God, then maybe it's worth grappling with the question of what the Bible is, right? And I don't think that this has to be a faith-shaking issue, but if the Bible is worth something in a religious way, which to some people it is, then it's worth grappling with. And it is filled with texts in which God deploys monsters and deploys monsters against human beings and deploys monsters against innocent human beings. That's not the case every time, but it's the case a lot of the time. So I think if you are willing to sit down and read those texts, and if you're willing to consider the possibility that what God's doing in those texts is not automatically okay just because he's the God character in the story, right? That's where the Nixon comparison comes in.
Yeah.
And maybe some others. If you're willing to consider the possibility that the God character in each ancient text is not automatically in line with your own view of God, then maybe it can be your own view of God that you take away rather than having to try to justify God sending Seraphim to kill hungry people or something. In other words, I think you asked, how do you reconcile the two? And I think step one is, to consider the possibility that the answer might not be to reconcile them, but instead to think a little more about the nature of the biblical texts, the nature of this ancient writing, all of these different ancient writers and thinkers who were reflecting on their world and their God and their land and the relationships between themselves and their God and themselves and their neighbor's God and their God and their neighbor's God, etc. And all of these incredible reflections were eventually brought together to form the anthology we call the Bible. So it's possible to have deep respect for that anthology and to appreciate that literature without trying to harmonize it with what you believe any hypothetical God must be like today.
Brilliant. By the way, you're in a totally safe space because most of my audience questions the Bible.
Uh-huh.
There are going to be, so we're already in a good place in terms of
Okay.
not needing to reconcile. Most of my
Okay.
audience sees fingerprints from humans throughout the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
And so the concept of God is almost a completely separate, like, unless you're addressing the
Uh-huh.
God that's depicted in the literature. And so, you're talking to me, and of course, my
Yeah.
stance would be, I think that, I don't buy this picture. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a skeptic. So I'm just being honest on where I'm at. But I loved the answer for those who are going through their own journey and learning how to navigate. But I loved how you're saying, let's disconnect.
Mhm.
Don't become a professional cherry picker if you have to, because
Mhm.
let's look at the good and let's not do the bad and try to justify it. So I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the ancient writers were not sort of mindless conduits for some kind of uh, uh, magically appearing text. They were people who were thinking and wrestling. And I mean, I've said this before, I've written this before. They were people who were pondering and speculating and grappling with all of these ideas like we do. And to read and appreciate their ancient reflections is wonderful. And it doesn't have to mean, well, if they say God's gonna slaughter all these people, I guess that means I gotta be on board. Right.
Well said. Well said. You show that Satan in the Hebrew Bible isn't God's arch nemesis. He's more like a prosecuting attorney in
Yeah.
God's own court. How did we get from that figure to the cosmic villain of later Christianity? And what does it tell us that even the adversary was originally on God's payroll?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was mentioning earlier, I don't remember why, that there was over time a development toward more dualistic theology. And so, certainly that's part of what happened. Uh, the to me, the great irony of this, or at least of objections to this, is that God was more in control when the adversary was just one of his entourage, one of his employees. Uh, you you hear, of course, a lot of defenses of how God is still in control of everything once Satan ascends to his, or descends, I don't know, to his to his evil throne. Uh, but in fact, in the Hebrew Bible, the Satan, right? Satan is just a Hebrew noun that means adversary, lowercase a. Eventually, that becomes used as a title, the adversary, and it's only much later that we get a name, adversary, capital A. So Satan, capital S. But early on, the Satan, the adversary, is a functionary in God's court. God has like a divine court, and the adversary's role is to oppose people, to examine, accuse, and sometimes harm people, like to see what's going to happen. And only later does he kind of get his own spin-off.
I mean, and if you play that last question back through your head and you think God's actually deploying him, like the Job scene, whoa, like rereading that through the lens you're describing
Mhm.
is actually kind of scandalous now that we think about it, because we
Yeah.
thought a random wild, like, nomadic entity that God doesn't have control of, that's trying to fight with God, like shows up and is like, hey, I'm gonna beat up your guy over here, and he's like, well, go for it, man, like they're in competition.
Uh-huh.
Instead, you're saying no, like he's doing his job that
Yeah.
God wants him to do.
Yeah, he's absolutely doing what his role is in the divine system. We see, I won't go through everything that I go through in the book. I go through a series of texts, but we can see that this is a role that develops over time, but that what's consistent is that the role of the Satan is to accuse people on God's behalf. And the Satan is in God's employ in Job. So this isn't just sort of an abstract principle, and then we kind of smush it into Job and say, it must be the same here. It's not that. It's that in Job, we see explicitly that God turns to the Satan who is going back and forth, like roaming around the earth, doing what he's supposed to do, like checking people out. His role, I mean, you can look at some of the other texts I talk about in the book. You can see what his role is. God turns to him and says, I mean, the Satan is one of the so-called sons of God. They're like godlets, right? The lower level divine beings. So God has all the godlets for a little assembly in the heavens. It happens twice in Job. And both times the Satan is one of the godlets, and God turns to him and says, hey, you, so I'm supplying some information here. Hey, you, whose role is to accuse people, have you considered my totally innocent servant Job? So God runs a divine court. If you have a judge who turns to the prosecutor and says, hey, have you looked at that guy? It is a textbook corruption, right?
Yes.
So God turns to the divine prosecutor and says, like, hey, check him out. And so, of course, the Satan does, because he's just doing his job. And when the Satan wants to harm Job, he asks God's permission. God says, you can do this, but not that. Then later on, he ups the ante. Okay, now you can do that. God is the one who instigates the whole thing. And it's maybe literally at the Satan's hands, but it's like I was going to say it's like hiring a hitman, but it's like the person even more in charge. It's the Godfather sending out, is it Paulie? I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
In addition, in addition to some of the Christian hate mail that I get sometimes, I'm now going to get emails correcting me on my memory of the Godfather movies. But
is it Godfather,
okay.
or is it Sopranos,
or is it yeah. Anyway, sorry. Go on.
No, this is a really good point I wanted to ask before we get to our final question, and it's a question in this, but if I back up, because I personally am just going to lay my cards out. I think this is all, like you said, humans who, I see human fingerprints in all of this, and I try to go to psychology, or at least try to understand why these stories may be depicted this way. And I wanted to ask your opinion on what you think. Like, the story of Job seems like it's just a story that humans are going, good people, bad things happen to good people. The problem of evil, and the way that they narrate a kind of myth that tells you what's going on, kind of like the omniscient narrators telling you what's happening in a place that there's no way, I don't think they have a clue about. In telling you this story, seems like they're trying to explain, like, why suffering, why is there bad things happening, and our God is still in control, though. It seems like it's trying to do that in a psychological way, if I were to interpret that.
I don't think the story of Job is about good things happening to bad people. Bad things happening to good people in general. I don't think that it's an explanation of the problem of evil or a treatment of it. That is virtually always what we hear. But in the book of Job, Job isn't just a good person. And nobody in the story treats the question as if, let's say Job Job never treats the question as if he's now pondering the problem of evil. In the book, Job is specifically, explicitly, repeatedly set apart, even from other good people. He is the best of the good people. He is the most righteous of his generation, meaning, and I mean, God, we see at the beginning of the story in the prose introduction, both the narrator and then in the voice of God, we see that Job alone was innocent and blameless of his generation. Like it's repeated multiple times in those first couple of chapters. So the issue in Job isn't why do bad things happen to good people? It's why have these things happened to Job? This matters for two reasons. One is because if we want the book to be about why bad things happen to good people, and the answer is that it's because God is prompting the Satan to do a torture experiment on them, that's not a good answer. That is not a good outcome. So let's not hope for the book to be sort of generalized about why bad things happen to good people. But the other reason it matters is because Job himself in the book never asks, why do these terrible things happen to good people? We see that in the Psalms, right? There are questions about that in the Psalms. But in Job, Job's questions are not even why is this happening to me? His main question is, how could you do this to me? Because it makes me look guilty. In other words, the character of Job does buy into the idea that bad things happen to bad people. So if that character buys into that theology, right? Do you follow?
Right.
Like if he's saying, for me to be punished by God makes me look guilty, that means he buys into the idea that bad things happen to bad people. So that it doesn't especially make sense to see the book as answering a different question, especially if God in the book never answers that other question. So I think it's just not about that, and is a much weirder book than we give it credit for.
I was going to say, may I follow up just a tad bit more to get your thoughts on that? Because that's a fascinating thing you made me think about, is like most humans, I think in almost all cultures, have this idea of like, whether it be karma, whether it be like bad things happen. If you do bad, you're going to get bad. You reap what you sow kind of stuff. And if I were to pretend, let's just say the author may be reflecting a people who have been constantly traumatized and constantly subordinated, nation after nation. Maybe there's something to that. I don't know. In the fact that, we may not get the best, we may not have all the rewards, we may not be, but I don't know. I'm trying to think through, like, is this kind of reflective of a corporate, idea? But Job, I don't even think is an Israelite from what I understand. So,
right. The character of Job is a
right.
foreigner. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really don't know what the answer is to this then.
Yeah. But again, I think the core principle is that the more neatly we try to package the material, the more out of luck we're going to be trying to make sense of it, because the way we package it, it just doesn't line up with what we actually see in the texts. Yeah.
I love it. You got me wanting to go open your book again.
Great.
And then exactly. So everybody get the book.
Thank you.
You write that the Bible's own criteria for entering the New Jerusalem would exclude God himself. You also explore how monsterization, especially the Giants tradition. Can you talk about how these monstrous narratives have real world consequences, both in the ancient world and today?
Yeah. So I think I want to take those 2 points apart for a minute. Somewhere in Revelation, there is a line about who gets to enter the New Jerusalem and who doesn't, and the descriptions of things that God does in the Bible, like lies and murder, would exclude him by those standards. And before anybody asks me where I'm getting that from, I mean, I'm not here to say buy my book. Like, it's in libraries too, but you could read it.
I will say it for you. Make sure you buy the book, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you. But I think the other question that you asked is so important, about how monsterization continues to be an issue. You can look at medieval writing, literary descriptions of different groups of people, and at medieval art, and see how different groups of people continued to be monsterized. There is a long, terrible, violent history of the monsterization of Jews. There is a long, terrible, violent history of the monsterization of Muslims. And there is a terrible, violent history of the monsterization of queer folks, and especially trans folks, right? I mean, this is something that people do to other people. You are different from me in some way that my brain can't compute. And so I categorize you as not quite human like me, not as much of a real person as me. We monsterize other people, and it's not just rhetoric. There is rhetoric of monsterization, but there's also deadly consequence. So if that is something that we can continue to think about, well, all to the good.
I'm so glad you turned this into a thing that is like now modern. I loved that because I just did a video called The Deadly Myth That Women Need to Be Controlled. Mm-hmm. And I went back in time and I went to like Pandora, of course, Eve. I even went to the Ishtar situation with Gilgamesh. When Gilgamesh berates her, like I wrote a Syriologist, Joshua Bowen. I said, hey, this seems like this might be like really attacking her as this demonizing, sucking the life force out of all these men, her lovers that are listed and stuff. Seems like a way of demonizing, like Lamashtu does, turns into the first wife of Adam in Jewish sort of all this stuff. And I'm like, what's going on here? And then it has real world consequences, though, is your point. And I love that about what you're doing with your work. And I thank you for taking your time here today to join me.
Thank you. It's been nice to chat with you. I know we've almost chatted before. So yeah, thank you.
We're here now. So everybody, if you haven't, where have you been? God's Monsters. Get the book. If you look, it's affordable. You can go get it right now on Audible. If you have a credit, you can get it on Kindle. Hardback, I mean, I would just go ahead and get the hardcover. It's $1 more and you have the paperback. That's my opinion. But, also, if you are not able to afford, make sure you put this on your list, ladies and gentlemen. If you can't afford the book right now and you just want to whet your appetite, I do have a video that I did on MythVision promoting this book, going over a little bit of the material. But let me tell you, the book goes very deep on some, I mean, it's popular level book, but it goes very deep into this material that I'd say 99% of people who read their Bibles do not even know, because a lot of this stuff is hidden behind the translation. Like, you just don't know what you're looking at. And so please check out the book. Go sign up for New Insights to the Hebrew Bible to go listen to Dr. Esther Hamori give her lecture as well. Any final words from you before I let you go? Because I know you're getting over, or hopefully getting over, whatever the sickness is.
Right. I appreciate the chance to come and chat. I know soon after the book came out, I went into anti-promo mode. When I was thinking of it as promo, it felt so unpleasant to me. So I went into a sort of anti-promo cocoon for quite a while, said no to everything. And now, a couple years later, it's such a pleasure to just be able to talk about these ideas, because they're interesting ideas that I can talk about with an interesting person, and it's a whole different world. So it's been really enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Links are in the description. And never forget, we are MythVision.